Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Tori and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. For those of you who don't know, we are a non-profit organisation who aim to strengthen the non-profit sector in both Australia and New Zealand by providing a variety of information, products, resources and programs. Our webinar today will be presented by Stephanie from Info Exchange, who will talk to you about the ins and outs of Microsoft SharePoint. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer section. So if you have a question, please type it in the question box on your webinar panel, and we'll go through them once the webinar is done. I'd now like to hand it over to Stephanie.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Thanks very much, Tori, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today during this webinar. Okay, just quickly a bit about me and Info Exchange. My name's Stephanie Kachayas. I'm a senior IT advisor and consultant here at Info Exchange. I have about 4 years experience working with SharePoint technologies. Before I worked at Info Exchange, I worked at a fairly large consulting firm as the internal information manager there, and there we used SharePoint quite heavily as a collaboration tool, both as an intranet and for document management. And now I've gone back into consulting after working in-house there at Info Exchange, where I work with clients that are all non-for-profits, just like Connecting Up and TechSoup. Info Exchange is a non-for-profit as well, and we specialise in empowering organisations through digital improvements. And the team that I'm part of is the consulting and ICT services team, and we are here to help clients implement new systems, particularly with Office 365. We've been doing a lot of work with this technology over the last year or so. Since I joined, there's been a real boom, and we'll talk a little bit about why that might be later on when I'll sort of give an overview, a light overview of Office 365 to start with. So that's me, and I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for Connecting Up for organising it. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about SharePoint, and it's a bit of a shallow dive into SharePoint. We only have an hour, and we don't assume much prior knowledge to this webinar. We can assume that some of you have never really used or seen SharePoint before. Some of you might have, and you can use this as a bit of a refresher for you. And also potentially you've only seen SharePoint on a server product before. And today I'll talk more about SharePoint Online, which comes with Office 365. We've been doing a series of webinars, Info Exchange and Connecting Up Info Exchange and Connecting Up have been doing a series of webinars recently. My colleague Matt Walton's been doing some on email migration and do-it-yourself email in Office 365. I've recently done a bit of a 3-part, more in-depth deep dive into SharePoint. That's a bit of a DIY, how to get started with SharePoint. This is a bit more of an introductory session that is really just to give you a flavour of what the product can do. But we do have other webinars, I guess, that go into deeper dives into things like email and just in general the Office 365 suite, because I will just be focusing mostly on SharePoint today. SharePoint is a very comprehensive system and a very big system that can be heavily developed and customised to be a pretty big and frankly expensive beast, especially when it's implemented on premises with servers. This webinar won't go into that. It's really focused on how non-for-profits and small organisations like yourselves, hopefully, who can't really invest in extensive server farms to host their intranets, can benefit from SharePoint Online features, which is free if you're eligible for the Microsoft free licensing. So this presentation is really about what you need to think about early on before you start doing SharePoint. SharePoint has a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a beast, and getting clients and getting organisations into trouble with their communication systems. You know, I've worked with the product now for many years, and I think the key is in the upfront design and thinking. So today I want to give you some good general information, go into what SharePoint is, and why organisations choose to use it, and through them we'll just go through some examples of the different sorts of things it does. I'll also quickly talk about some of the alternatives or complementary systems that sit with SharePoint, which you might have heard of, that also come with the product, with the suite, namely OneDrive for Business and Yammer. So the three of those products, SharePoint, Yammer and OneDrive for Business, all sort of overlap in their own little ways, and either in actual technical function or just in concept in what they offer to organisations. And I think it's good for you to understand what each of them do. And finally, I do, as I said, I think design and thinking up front about your SharePoint project is really key to its success. And so the final part is just me going through some sort of key tips that I think organisations should think about if you're thinking of implementing SharePoint. So so that's the run through today. Hopefully we'll finish with enough time for some questions at the end. If you do see anything that I talk about that really sparks something, you can put a chat question in, and we'll either address it there on the spot, or we might just hold it off till later, depending what the question is. And yeah, I will hopefully end about 10 to 15 minutes early before the hour, so we can take questions. Cool. So what is SharePoint, and what am I talking about here? Okay. So SharePoint is a system that organisations use to build secure internal websites, also known as intranets. That's a really simple description, but I think kind of captures it. And then what those intranets do can get interesting and complicated. But essentially, that's what it is. It's a big CMS, which is a content management system. A content management system is a software package that provides tools and organising structures for which to build websites and content. By website content, I mean things like web pages, documents, videos, images, and sometimes other interactive applications like calendars or task lists, which is all these bits of applications and data and bits of building blocks go in to make the SharePoint application as a whole and as a content management system. Content management system as a word is often used to describe website CMSs, so you might have heard of things like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla. There are these platforms out there that are also designed to be a house for your website, to be an operating framework for a website. SharePoint can be used for websites and is in some places, but we won't be talking about that today. Really, traditionally, SharePoint is used as an intranet tool, as a secure platform. It used to be, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it used to be a very expensive server product, in that you buy from Microsoft, like you buy an email server from Microsoft and you install it and you host it either on your own premises or in a hosted cloud environment, and you run that server, you upgrade that server, you maintain it. It used to be just like that, and you would all of your data in SharePoint would sit on these servers. But it is now a cloud product as well. There's now a version of SharePoint called SharePoint Online, which is part of the Office 365 suite. So to access SharePoint Online, you need to have an Office 365 subscription, and you also need a browser and an internet connection, because SharePoint, like all of Office 365, is hosted not in a server necessarily, although I guess there is a server at Microsoft's end, but it's essentially a cloud product. So just like Facebook and Twitter and Google Apps and Gmail are cloud-based products, in that you don't really know or care where the data is being stored. It's just stored in the internet, and you access it through a login. Is exactly the same concept of Office 365. You get your logins and you log into the portal, and that's where all of your data is stored with Microsoft. So we'll go into that a little bit more now. So, like I said, originally you had your computers and they would connect directly to servers on a premises or in the cloud. Now you have, and you'd have to have different servers for different applications. So you'd have an email server or a SharePoint server and a link server. Oh, I need to update that because it's Skype for Business now, although some places are still calling it Link. But essentially now with Office 365, instead of these different server products, you have a cloud environment of applications. So one of those applications is SharePoint Online, which we'll be talking about. There's also Office Web Applications, which are these little boxes here, and that's basically giving you Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote in the cloud in the browser. So you don't need to have those applications or those pieces of software loaded onto your machine. You can edit documents in Word in the browser product. That comes with the Office 365 subscription as well, the ability to use those products in the cloud. What I've got there here is Link, but it's actually changing now to Skype for Business. Microsoft bought Skype and is integrating its instant messaging platform, which used to be called Link, into Skype, and it's being renamed Skype for Business. At the moment, it's really just a reskin. It's just literally a cosmetic change to the product. But essentially, it's an instant messaging and video conferencing system. So you know, you can. It's got presence. It links to your calendars because it's all on the same login. It'll know if you're away, and it'll have a little red dot next to your name if you're in a meeting, and people can message you or have a VoIP call with you or have a video conference and share their screen with Skype, whether when they're all in the same network of 365. So that comes with Office 365, as well as Outlook, email in the cloud. So instead of, just like you don't need to host a SharePoint server, you also don't need to host an email server anymore, an Exchange server. That goes up into the cloud, and your email is hosted as part of Microsoft's technologies. And the other thing I've got here, which is separate, is OneDrive for Business, and that's another cloud-based storage. So SharePoint stores documents as part of its offering, as part of what it does, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But so does OneDrive for Business. OneDrive is a personalised location for each person with an Office 365 login. So in your organisation, if everyone has an Office 365 login, they have their own profile, they have their own mailboxes, obviously, and their own Exchange email account, and they have a OneDrive for Business account, which only they can access. And it's like a Dropbox in the cloud. It's a document storage area that each individual can use as they see fit. We'll talk a little bit more about the differences between SharePoint and OneDrive for Business later, because I think it's important that you understand the difference and the benefits of using one over the other and understanding when you would use one over the other. So we'll go into that in a little more detail down the track. So yeah, if you are eligible for non-for-profit status and Microsoft approves your eligibility, you receive all of these services for free and on a donation license. If you want to go up to the E3 edition, which is a little bit of a higher edition where you get a few extra bits of functionality, really more about different devices and mobile devices you can use the products on is the biggest difference. You pay a very small amount per user per month. Don't quote me, I think it's around $6 or something a month per user, which is, again, heavily discounted as opposed to like the normal rate. Most of our clients are just starting with the free one, and if they want to upgrade, they do. So that's Office 365 in a nutshell. SharePoint, as part of that, provides a few different cloud-based services in its thing, and that is it provides a platform for an intranet, it provides a platform for document management, and it provides a platform for teams to collaborate together in a sort of more what's the word I'm looking for, a more granular way, I suppose. So as opposed to an intranet being for all staff and for being very sort of one-way communication, team sites are much more focused on direct teams. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. In fact, right now. So why would you use SharePoint? Why do businesses see the benefit in SharePoint? Well, it does a lot. It's a very powerful platform, and it does, I think, three things really well, and mostly out of the box without a lot of customization. And I think what the majority of organisations use it for is as an intranet, the platform for your organisation's internal homepage, and a hub of useful information. For document management, providing document libraries which have very sophisticated types of functions on them that give you a lot more sophistication than a file share, which a lot of organisations use, which is really just a dumping ground for data, which organisations can kind of edit as they see fit, and you know, different organisations have different levels of success with how well they hold and manage a file share. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a glass of water. Okay, so document management, and then, as I said, team sites, which really are there to support teams working on projects together and providing a kind of hub. So the benefits of using these things are for organisations are things like intranets are great for reducing email traffic. A lot of my clients want to streamline and reduce everyone emailing each other about different things, and also standardising internal communications and having a centralised port of information for those key resources internally, staff lists, policy documents, links to other systems, and just in general as a homepage, as a sort of hub and portal for your organisation, a first port of call. Most places, you know, an intranet is their homepage at work. So they go to work, they open their browser, and the page that comes up is the homepage of their intranet. Document management is fantastic for things like version control, minimising the duplication of documents through an automatic version control system, and co-authoring documents. So with SharePoint, when a document is stored on SharePoint, two people can be in that document at the same time working on it. So that's especially, actually, sorry, it only works sometimes for Excel documents in the cloud. Excel documents will sometimes lock you out if it doesn't want you editing it with someone else because it's a complex document. But certainly with Word and PowerPoint, you can be in the document at the same time as someone else. And finally, team sites is fantastic for keeping all project and team-related content together, and can be built across the business, and can be tailored, as tailored as you want per team, but also as standardised across per team if you want to enforce a certain way of working, say a project management solution or a consistent document management solution per team. You could implement through, you know, templating out team sites and implementing them that way. Okay, so this slide is a blank slide a blank intranet page. So this is something that you would see very quickly out of the box with a SharePoint Online login. Sorry, you have to build these different areas, but it wouldn't take very long because there's really nothing customized here. Everything you see there comes very easily out of the box. Along here, you've got some document libraries with quick links to them, policies and procedures, and training and handbooks, an announcements list which has, you know, a window into content, links to other applications, which is just a quick links box, an events page, and a staff directory. I mean, these are the sorts of things you see very quickly. And up here at the top, if you can see that, you can see there's finance, HR, sales and marketing. There are team sites. That's where we go in to work on the documents that we want to work on with our teams and share information that are just related to that team. So what you see there is a completely unbranded, you could stick a logo up there and you could change some of the colours and it would just be a very simple, clean intranet for your organisation, and that could be achieved very quickly. You know, either teaching yourself or just going through the free sort of resources on Microsoft's support pages. Taking it to the next level, that's what I said about changing the colours. You could play around with the way your different news feeds look. You could have CEO updates. You can put in your custom logo. You can change the colours to suit your needs, and you know, put in specialised links to certain areas if you want. And this is the sort of thing, again, that might take a little bit of extra effort, but again, it doesn't involve any coding or special development. This is the sort of thing that you can figure out how to do yourself just by page editing and making it look a little bit nicer for you. Finally, for intranets, you know, you can get, this is now a sort of skinned intranet that has, you know, a special menu colour, special colours over the web parts, but there's nothing really here that, again, is particularly kind of development-y. It really looks like it's just had a sort of a style, a CSS style sheet put over it to tell it to have a certain look and feel, but essentially is using the sorts of technologies that SharePoint just offers out of the box. Intranets can also host things like forms. So SharePoint, in SharePoint, everything, all of the bits and pieces that make up a site are basically lists or libraries. A library is a document library, or a picture library, or a page library. And in libraries, the item, the piece of data, quote unquote, that you're working with is a document, is an actual file. Whereas in a list, which this form is for, is essentially just like a data set, which is really just like a fancy Excel spreadsheet. A list can have just columns and rows of data. So rows of data with customized columns along the top that have different kinds of, you know, attributes on them. So a form is really just the front end of that data set. So when you want to add a new line to the data, whether it's a new announcement or a new staff member for the staff list, you just go add new, and a form will pop up. Now, out of the box, a form will look very simple and just have the columns that you've told the list to have, which you can edit. What this slide is showing is a customized form that was built in a product called InfoPath, and that form is a little bit more in-depth and has been edited to look and feel differently to a standard form. But this is the sort of thing that you can do with a little bit of extra work on the front end of SharePoint. That said, if you didn't need it to be this complicated and you wanted to use an out-of-the-box form, you could. And in fact, I'm going to risk it and try to do a bit of live demoing. So hopefully you can see that, which is my demo site before. And if we go to, this is an announcements list on the front page, and there's a button here that says add new announcement, and if I click that, hopefully you're seeing this. Give it a second. Right, the form for the announcements list is there, and I haven't edited that at all. That's just out of the box. It's just what happens when you add a new line. But if we go back, and so if we added something in here, what you'd see is a new line item in that list, which in this instance is displaying on the front page. But if we go into the list, we can see a list of the different items, and I mean, as you can see there, it acts very much almost like a database where you've got an item that you can then edit, and you can even put it into edit mode in the browser like that, where it becomes, like an Excel spreadsheet, really. Okay, I'll bring back up my slides. Okay, document management. So SharePoint, as I mentioned, has libraries in it, and libraries are where we keep documents. So in SharePoint, you upload a document by clicking and dragging it into the browser, and it just it uploads itself. And then you'll have libraries and folders that you can, documents and folders in a library that you can edit. And as soon as you upload something to a SharePoint Online library, all of these extra features are by default enabled. And I mean, you can customize these settings on document libraries pretty heavily. But essentially, what you see there is the sorts of things you can see very quickly when you look at a document property. So you can edit the properties, you can view in the browser, you can check in, check out, which if you've got some background with SharePoint, the concept of checking in and checking out documents are probably very familiar to you. It's a bit of an old school way of how they used to manage their documents in SharePoint, and it's still available and has definitely still a lot of purpose. So the concept of checking in and checking out a document is that if you wanted to take ownership of the document and edit it, you'd check it out to you, you'd edit it, and then you'd check it back in. And when you're doing that, the document becomes uneditable, and the edits that you're making are kind of hidden from other users. And if they go into that document, they'll see the old version until you've rechecked it in and published your major version. So it's really good functionality for things like policies, libraries, and official templates and things that you want to have that level of control over. And you could set it so that only some people have that control and others don't. So that's what a check-in and check-out kind of essentially does. But you can now, there was a time where SharePoint only let you do that, basically, with documents, like in the early versions. But now, you can turn off that feature altogether, and the document library can be a lot more like a working document library where you don't have that level of control on it, and you have to check it in, and you can just edit it and save it, and it will save. So there's that. There's version history, which I'll show in a moment. So version history, like I just mentioned about checking in and checking out, or checking in major versions, you can you can go back and see edits that have been made of what date and by what person on a document. And that happens automatically. So you don't have to resave that document, you don't have to rename it. You go in and then you edit it, and those changes are saved in the back end. And so it makes a lot of what a lot of organizations do when they're working on file shares in particular, where you've got, version 1, Stephanie's version, version 2, Matt's version, version 3, blah, 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 and then, at the end of a project, it's, what was that final version? Oh no, Matt took a copy offline to go and play with, and he's sent his back, and someone needs to consolidate all those changes through, or whatever it is. A lot of that is eliminated by this sort of thing that happens just as part of the product. I mentioned co-authoring, and this is another example of co-authoring where so you can have two people in a document at the same time, and you can both be in there editing it. And I don't know if you can quite see there, it's a bit faint, but essentially what happens is when you go into a document and someone else is editing it, the part that they're working on becomes locked, and you can sort of see there's someone's name there over this section. And if you wanted to edit that section, it wouldn't actually let you. It'll just grey it out. And it was only until you both updated your changes that you'd see those changes come through and perhaps be able to edit it if they're no longer working in it anymore. So it certainly helps this sort of idea of, it's got inbuilt ways of managing conflicts that actually become sort of more like a Word function than a SharePoint function.
Stephanie, I'll just interrupt you there. I've just got a question or a couple of questions here from Shirley. She's just asking, how do you edit a page, or where to get out of box forms from, and how do you create or set up directories for filing documents?
So, okay, so editing a page, I can quickly show you. I think you mean by editing a page, a lot of this has to do with rights. so the kinds of editing rights and permissions that you have on the site. So provided you have either a design right or you have full control, you can edit a page, and you can see there's a button up at the top left, up in the top right called Edit, and you should be able to edit the page there. So that's where you can kind of literally go through and, you know, put content into the page, including web parts, which is what these are, which are really just views of little libraries. And let me do that because I have full control over this site. Out-of-the-box forms, well, sort of, I guess by that, I mean, this when I press new announcement and this form pops up, that is the out-of-the-box form. I didn't have to do anything. All I did was, you know, insert a new announcements list. And when I said, please add an announcements list in the back end when I was creating my content, the form comes with it. So there's no, this is just out of the box. There's been very little edit. I mean, I added a column, and so that's what that leader announcement is there. And that comes automatically. I didn't have to edit the form. It just happens because I added a column. But in terms of in terms of an out-of-the-box form, that's it. If you're looking for templates for other forms, I'm sure there are a lot of ones out there that you could probably Google and find, and then maybe edit so that you can apply it to your SharePoint list via InfoPath. A note on InfoPath, though, is that it is being discontinued by Microsoft in the next 10 years. They've given people plenty of time to find other form solutions, but essentially they're going to push that to their kind of, you know, SharePoint has Microsoft has a wide range of partners and third-party application partners that build form products and build workflow products and build, you know, page editing and publishing and document management products. And they're what you'd go to if you wanted to start playing with really fancy forms. You'd want to buy an add-on. It makes life so much easier, but they do cost money. So as I always tell clients when they're starting out to start small and start out of the box, and then, you know, see whether or not they want to kind of go down a more fancy form or workflow path. Finally, the question was about, I think, a file storage directory. So I think what you're asking about is what I was just showing you, which was a library. So a library is, you know, and I'll very quickly show you how to create these later, but essentially a library is just a type of list, and you go add new library, and you get a library, and as you know, this should look familiar in that it's like a list, but what you can see here is that there's actually a document behind these, and all I've done there is upload, you know, click and drag these documents, and then I've, you know, added columns to the list and given them metadata against those columns, which we don't have time to get into today. It's just not that kind of webinar, but these are the sorts of things you can do. And then I've sort of managed this library as a file share. I'll get into that a little more in a minute. I do want to move on. But yeah, essentially, I can do this sort of thing, the version control, the document management, you know, co-authoring, and all of the other features because the document is on SharePoint. If the document was being hosted on just a normal file share, you wouldn't have these sorts of features. Finally, you can use the desktop application for OneDrive for Business to sync a document. So to sync a library, sorry, not a document, a whole library onto your local machine. So at Info Exchange, we have some libraries for our client documents, and I sync that to my local machine, and I then have those documents ready and able and in my Windows Explorer, which makes life really easy for me when I'm trying to access those documents really quickly via, Word or Save As, or just via the Windows Explorer window, as opposed to the browser, which I would have to go to get these documents otherwise. But I'll talk a little bit more about OneDrive for Business in a minute. Quickly moving on, team collaboration is something I mentioned before that it also does, and this is an example of a site where we would use with clients to work on projects together. And on a team site, you get a project summary list, you get its own document library. A lot of this stuff just comes with the template of the site. You don't have to create the document library; it's there ready for you. A news feed, and I mean here I've added a bunch of other custom things because we were working on that with the client. But essentially, like all of the essential things, a task list, which I'll show you here. These come out of the box where you add tasks and you can kind of put things on the timeline and see when things are happening with the team, and also a calendar, which I don't have a photo of there, but essentially you can have calendars and a news feed, which has which is just like a little social feed on the page that that come out of the box as part of a team site. So this is the sort of thing that I mean, where if you had, go back, something like this, where you've got your team sites on the top of your intranet, and you click through to that team site and you'd see maybe something like that, where that team has been working together on something. Okay, so I want to quickly talk about other tools for Share that come with Office 365 and how they interact with SharePoint. Oh, I did remember to update this one with the scope. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a full range of things that come out of the box with SharePoint, in particular SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, but also Yammer. When we click, when you're in your 365 site, when you're in your SharePoint site, you always have this sort of your mega menu up here, your 365 menu. And that shows you all of the different applications that you have as part of, the 365 suite. And here you'll see, my Outlook, my calendar, Yammer, OneDrive, Sites, which is the SharePoint area. If you have CRM, you have CRM, but you might not. There are all my online applications, and I'm an admin, so I've got an admin portal. But essentially, these are all the things that come as part of the 365 suite, and you need to understand that there's different reasons for using different ones. One of the big ones is OneDrive for Business. So the idea, and I guess the easiest way to explain this to people is that, often if you've got a shared drive at your organisation, say it's called the P drive or the S drive, and that's where everyone stores their documents that are collaborative, and that you want everyone to generally want people to save things there so that it's backed up and in your file share. You might also have implemented at your organisation like a home drive, or which is like everyone has their own folder, which is their own, say, H drive or E drive or whatever you want to call it, and that is just for them. This is very similar to that. SharePoint Online sites and SharePoint libraries are the libraries that the organisation manages and that are shared areas. OneDrive for Business is your own area here, and if I clicked that, it would take me to my OneDrive for Business. But if you were logged in as someone else and clicked that, it would take you to their OneDrive for Business. Just like your email would take you to your email as opposed to someone else's email. Whereas if you clicked Share Sites to SharePoint, you'd all go to the same place. You'd go to your intranet or your team site or whatever it is that you wanted, and that's where everything is stored. So generally, that's the difference between using one or the other. Now, Microsoft have made things interesting by giving more data for free to OneDrive for Business than to SharePoint, although you can expand SharePoint. So you get 10 gig plus 5 gig per license as a base for SharePoint, and you get 1 terabyte per user for OneDrive, and so that was interesting because they sort of, best practice wouldn't be to store organizational files on OneDrive, it would be to store them on a SharePoint library, because that's where everyone can access them and it's sort of like your organization's documents. And really, what someone would need 1 terabyte for document storage for work, for their own personal use, is I don't think I've ever come across anyone needing that much space. That OneDrive for Business account does not belong to them technically. It belongs to the organisation, and they are given, they're given access to it, just like they're given access to an email account when they join the organisation, and it will go once they leave. So, so it's not like where they should potentially be storing their holiday photos, for example, because that would be their own stuff. To make it super interesting and also a little bit confusing, you see before when I did my sync demonstration or slide where I talked about syncing down to my laptop, the little client that sits on your desktop that is the sync tool is called OneDrive for Business. But that little sync tool can sync SharePoint libraries and can sync your OneDrive for Business. So it's a bit confusing because we're really discussing 2 things. We're discussing the OneDrive for Business online storage area, and we're discussing a little client that acts as the sync tool between your desktop and a library. And it is a bit confusing. It gets even more confusing when we say that there's also a product called OneDrive without the for business at the end, and OneDrive is a consumer product that anyone can buy or just sign up for free, just like Google Docs or Dropbox or Box or something like that. It's a competitor to that. So that just makes it even more confusing. But yeah, hopefully that explains the basics. So that's what the difference is. And so when you're thinking about implementing SharePoint, you have to think about where your files are going to live in SharePoint. Yammer is also different to SharePoint. Yammer is like Facebook. So it's basically very, very similar to Facebook in its design, and it's like a news feed and a social network for an organisation. So everyone, when you can sign up for Yammer for free without Office 365, but with Office 365 you get the professional edition. So this is what you get. You can create groups can either be created centrally or be created from the business, and people can sort of put announcements up, share ideas, and it's you've got the app. It's great for communications. It's less great for document management. I mean, documents would be stored in SharePoint, wouldn't be stored in Yammer. Yammer's not a document management tool. You can attach files to things, but that's sort of not really managing it. It's just attaching a file. So you'd want to think about why you use Yammer over SharePoint over something. And SharePoint does have communications tools. It does have announcements feeds and blogs. So if you want to just focus on that, you can. If you want to not focus on that on SharePoint and push people to collaborate on Yammer, you can do that. It's just really about knowing what your organisation needs. You can actually implement Yammer on the front page of this is the Info Exchange front page, and you'll see here we have a little Yammer feed. We use Yammer very heavily at Info Exchange, and we tend not to use SharePoint for communications, so we will do that. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 10 minutes too, and I do want to give you time for questions, so I'm going to go through the next bit, and then we'll hopefully have questions at the end. But so I just wanted to make clear what the difference, especially between OneDrive for Business and Yammer, is to SharePoint, and it's really just so you've got a basic understanding, because I do find some people get confused about what they all do. So as long as you understand the differences, you can then think about what you're going to use them for. Okay, so this is the bit where I get very preachy with people, because I think I've shown you the sort of the how, some of the nitty-gritty, and I've gone into a little bit of the what is SharePoint. This kind of comes back to the why and the how of what you implement in your organisation, and I think this is really important, and I think it actually really is the key to success of any SharePoint project. If you are thinking about implementing SharePoint, you need to be really, really clear as to what you're going to use it for. Why do you want it? And really ask yourself the tough questions. is SharePoint the best tool to solve your problem? If you want people to be able to just share ideas really fluidly, and if you've got people on the road, maybe you should look at Yammer. Like maybe if it's not about documents, and if it's not that kind of classic intranet thing you're wanting, maybe don't go there. It might end up being more trouble than it's worth. Unless you have a clear remit for understanding why you want to use SharePoint, I wouldn't even go there, because so many of these projects take up a lot of time and energy and then don't work because people have just sort of implemented it for the sake of implementing it because it's there. The SharePoint it provides a lot of differences. If people are used to emailing and you want them to stop emailing, you need to think about the implications of that and how you're going to make that happen. Working in document libraries is very different to working in file shares. It's a lot better in a lot of ways, but it also has its idiosyncrasies that people are going to need to learn. Are you ready to go on that journey of change? Can you really articulate what you want to use SharePoint for? And only until you have a clear purpose should you tackle it. Implementation, how are you going to do it? Do you have the capability and capacity internally to implement it? Do you need an external partner, and who will manage it going forward? These are questions that you need to answer really upfront and be really honest with your own capabilities and budgets and capacity. This is the fun bit, and this is the bit that often gets skipped. What is your SharePoint architecture going to be like? So I kind of touched on it today in terms of talking about libraries and lists and what makes up SharePoint. Basically, libraries, lists, and sites. Sub-sites group libraries and lists together, and they all sit together under a home site. What does that look like for you? Does that mean that you've got a lot of stuff up at the top level because you just want to have, you know, a few key document libraries and an announcements list, and that means you're just working up here? Do you want to have teams working in their own areas? If so, what are those? What's that? You know, what does this look like? It looks a little bit like an org chart. It often aligns with an org chart, but it doesn't necessarily. And if so, you know, how does this look? You need to think about this up front before you build it. And finally, when thinking about SharePoint up front, you need to think about governance and access. A lot of people get really full on about access, and I think because you can start to control who has access to what content in SharePoint a little bit more easier, and it's something that a site administrator can do, and you don't necessarily need tech support to do it. People get really, I think, over-engineer their permissions, unless you have a really strong criteria for why you would lock something down. And absolutely there are obviously reasons to lock certain things down, but it becomes very hard to maintain, and sometimes there's more trouble than it's worth. SharePoint is a collaboration tool by default. It wants people to be able to access things and get in and share. Like, that's how it works best. And if you've got permission settings across every site, because that's where the marketing team work and no one else needs to have access to that because the marketing team work there, but they don't actually have sensitive information, that's when it starts to get tricky. So it's just thinking about what are the things you need to lock down, and how's the most practical way of implementing that without making things hard for yourself. So if you're still thinking about implementing SharePoint, you need to, the 4 things you absolutely need to do is define its purpose, understand your current systems and information architecture, assign people to lead and own the project, and that can be more than one person, and consider the cultural implications of a more shared approach to information. Because some organisations are ready, and some aren't. Okay, we've got 7 minutes, so I'm really keen to hear your questions if you've got any.
Thanks, Stephanie. We do have a couple of questions here. We've got one from Nikki. She asks, what is the data limit in SharePoint for Office 365 for non-profits free version?
Yep. So if we go back to, where was it? Yeah. SharePoint Online, you get 10 gig by like base, and then per user half a gig. So if you've got 6 users, that's 3 gig, so it's 13 gig total. You can buy more storage though for SharePoint, and it's actually it's pretty cheap. It's like $2.40. Last time I checked, it was $2.40 per gigabyte per year. So if you wanted to buy an extra 100 gig, it's about $240 a year. And you just sort of order it through the portal, through your accounts page. So that's in SharePoint. That's not counting the 1 terabyte per user for free, which is in OneDrive, which is a different place of storage, and also obviously not counting the storage that you get as part of email. So they section it up. Email gets a certain amount of storage, which I actually couldn't tell you off the top of my head what it is. Yeah.
Easy. We've got a question from Natish. If we need a shared drive on SharePoint, then we need to buy more space, or can we have a folder on OneDrive that will share it with the team?
Look, I wouldn't advise setting up a folder like as in everyone having access to a team, like a user that is acting like a OneDrive. Yeah, I've heard that suggested before. So that would mean that you'd each have to share a login to that user, quote unquote user, which isn't really a user. And I think that would make life difficult for syncing and other sorts of. So the whole concept of Office 365 is that you've got one account. It knows who you are. Like and my desktop knows that I'm Stephanie because I'm logged into with my 365 account. SharePoint knows I'm Stephanie. Email knows I'm Stephanie. That account connects me. Or Yammer knows I'm Stephanie, and I've got I can log into all of it and it never prompts me for logins which it will do. If you start logging in and out using other users, you're going to start. It'll be cumbersome, I think, as for an end user experience. As I just said, it's pretty cheap to buy extra storage, and I also think I just think culturally and as an information management point of view, I like the idea of but I would like the idea, because I'm an information manager, aren't I, of something like this, and thinking about where your information is stored hierarchically in your organisation, as opposed to there's this account for this, there's this account for this, there's this account for this. So that would be my recommendation.
Cool. We've got a question from Tanya. In the team space, can you give access to those outside the organisation, as in an outside Active Directory, to the documents and the area within the team space?
Yep, good question. So yes and no. Yes, you can open up SharePoint sites to external people. The caveat is that those people need to have either an Office 365 account or a Microsoft account of some sort, so like a Hotmail account or an Outlook.com account. So it would be like, it would be like it wouldn't let you authenticate with a Facebook account or with a Gmail account. And when you say Active Directory, if that Active Directory is syncing up to another 365 tenant and you've enabled external sharing, then they should be able to log in. That said, I find I have bugs with that when I've tried to, both when I've tried to enter other organisations' shared portals and when trying to invite them into mine. It's possible, but it can be a little bit fiddly to get right. But it is possible, and I have seen it work.
Thanks, Stephanie. We've got a few more, so we'll just work through them. We've got Yvonne here. She says, is there a scenario where using Yammer and SharePoint would be appropriate? Is there a risk with multiple sites that staff favour one over the other?
Yes, absolutely. There is a risk. SharePoint isn't as mobile. It isn't as sort of interactive as Yammer. So, I mean, when I say Yammer's like Facebook, it's really, the user experience is almost identical to Facebook. You get an alert on the app, you open it up, you can get direct messaging, you've got threads on posts and things like that, just like you do on Facebook. So, as a user, if you've got particularly unsavvy users or that you know that they use Facebook, and you want to cultivate that sort of discussion, then Yammer is sort of, for me, a no-brainer for organisations like that, and they should look at that. That said, I mean, I do think that there are times when having both is fine. It's just about being really clear with your staff what you expect them to use it for. I like SharePoint for things like all staff official announcements, and also potentially like a CEO blog, where it's very sort of one way, and you're not expecting comments necessarily. You can have comments on a blog, but it's less sort of like, it's less of a Facebook, less of a mobile experience, more of a, I'm at my desk, let's go to the home page. Oh, an alert on my home page because there's a, I don't know, it's payday next week and I need to put in my timesheet. I don't know, something like that. Whereas, but I mean, but it's a good question, and I think it's very dependent on your organisation and the culture there already. So it's really about just knowing what you want. But it is possible to have both. It's just being really clear what they're for.
Now we've got just a couple of questions from Shirley and then one from Helen, and then unfortunately we'll have to wrap it up there. So any other questions? Is it okay if we can forward them through to you, Stephanie, after the webinar?
Sure thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Easy. We'll just address these last two. Shirley asks, do you run workshops to train people on how to develop site architecture and best practice? And can you just go into the best practice for SharePoint file backups?
Yes, I do. Well, yes, I do through Connecting Up. We actually just finished one a couple of weeks ago, which was a three-parter kind of a DIY, and we spent the first 2 hours really deep dive into this slide here, which is design, and really actually quite theoretical as to why you would, thinking about information architecture and breaking that down. So I do, and you can look out on Connecting Up for those DIY webinars. And then when you said SharePoint backups, well, look, the beauty of it being in Microsoft Cloud is that you don't worry about that sort of thing. So it's all getting backed up by Microsoft, and there's like a 99.9. They have the service level agreement, which you would go to the Microsoft Service Center. And that, like, if it goes down on you, they refund you. Like it's actually, you're buying a product from Microsoft. It's like, you're no longer buying a product from an IT cloud provider. You're buying it from Microsoft, and you enter an SLA with them. So when you say backup, I mean, I could go into maybe like an we don't have time to go into like archiving processes, but there's also that. I mean, you would want to probably clear out some of your libraries or create new libraries as you go. You can have as many libraries as you want, and so there is a question about how you kind of maintain libraries. But in terms of the actual physical kind of data backup, that's all covered by Microsoft's data and security sort of stuff, and there's plenty of that resource online.
Easy, thanks, Stephanie. Just the last question last question from Helen. She's just gone into the site's homepage and clicked on the SharePoint logo, and it talks about websites. Is this referring to intranet? She's just a bit confused with that.
That's a good question. So yeah, you probably will see, especially if you've got an older tenant that you bought, over 6 months ago or around there. SharePoint for Microsoft literally until a couple of months ago was offering websites on SharePoint Online. They've discontinued that. However, if you were to sign up tomorrow, you wouldn't see that. But if you signed up, a little while ago, you probably signed up while I was still offering it, and so it will still be there. Ignore it. It does mean a website. It actually does mean an external facing site that you can publish to the web. They, I think, quite rightly made a strategic decision that was no longer really their core business. And SharePoint sites are actually quite tricky to edit and maintain as a public website unless you were working on a server. So if you go into your Office 365 Admin Center and look into websites and SharePoint and websites along the left, you'll You'll see actually now there's links to GoDaddy and Wix, which are cloud-based website providers that now Microsoft has a deal with, that they're actually pushing you to that third-party software now. It's just not their core business doing web CMSs really, and for the web, it should be intranet. So if you see the word website, it is a website actually, yes.
Easy. Thank you, Stephanie. We have no more questions, although I'll just say if anything pops into their head after the webinar, feel free to email events@connectingup.org. And again, thank you, Stephanie, for presenting today. Thank you, everyone else, for participating. We will be sending an email with the recording to all registered attendees in the next 2 business days. Don't forget to check out our website, newsletters, Facebook and Twitter for information on upcoming events. And other than that, I thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Cheers.